The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome everyone to the deltaDNA webinar. This afternoon, my name is Isaac Roseboom. I'm Chief Strategy Officer here at deltaDNA, and I'm going to talk to you about important trends in ad strategies and how to benefit from them. So just quickly, before we jump into the ad strategies, I want to talk a little bit about who we are and how we know so much about ads. So deltaDNA is a industry leader in analytics, CRM, and monetization. We have a platform with 100% focus on games for providing this as a service. We have a unique blend of technology and consultancy services, which really is aimed at driving player engagement. We take a player-first view on all the different aspects of game design, whether it be ad monetization or IAPs or engagement or retention. We always like to think about the players first. And of course, that means that we're trusted by all the big names in games. And there's a few of those sort of scattered over on the right there, a few of the bigger people that we've worked with. So why is deltaDNA interested in ads? Well, one of the things, traditionally we worked on analytics as a service, and then also got very interested in in-app purchases and how to optimize those. And one of the things that we saw in our clients, and one of the things they complained a lot about, was ad monetization. People were very cautious on ads. They didn't know if they should use them or not. I mean, we're talking sort of 3 years ago now. If they did use them, they would put them in very late, and then they would sort of not understand why they weren't working or whether players weren't engaging with them. And then there was a constant, and there is still a constant challenge of blacklisting, so people being worried about competitor ads or inappropriate ads, and a lack of transparency from the ad networks. And so, one of the things we saw in the market was that there was no one that was taking a player-first approach for ads. No one was thinking about how to do ads in a way that would be more engaging for players and make the game more fun, as opposed to it just being something that pops up at them and annoys them. And we kind of, in our heart of hearts, felt that if you could do ads in a way that the players would engage with, you would do better. And really, that's why we have started, or we started working on, and we continue to work on our smart ads mediation product. And so, the real kind of use case here is to try to blend ads in naturally into the player lifecycle. So this is just a sort of toy chart to try to think about game design from the perspective of the player. Players, if the game is very hard or it's unclear, they'll become anxious. If the content is very slow and it's very grindy, they become bored. And so when you have players that are not interested in purchases, and obviously many of them will be, 90% plus of the players will never spend, you want to be able to identify them early and give them an alternative way to monetize. And that helps you, of course, as a games developer or publisher, because you're getting revenue from these players that you couldn't before. But also for the players, it helps them because it gives them a small experience of what it's like to be a premium, what it's like to be a paying player, and they enjoy that as well. So having that balance in ad monetization is important between the player and the game. So like I say, this kind of thinking is what led us to develop smart ads. And, it's gone from strengths to strengths over the years. This is kind of a kind of marketing flow through of how we see the different elements of smart ads adding up to deliver better eCPMs for our clients. And obviously that includes, the classic elements of mediation, so being able to have a dynamic cascade, having large quantity deals on networks. But towards the tail end and sort of up at the top, the right side of this is much more about having the right in-app strategy for ads, making sure that when people are looking at ads, they're in an environment where they feel comfortable and they're happy to click on them. And also understanding and being able to optimize that with the reporting coming back. And of course, that's one of the advantages of our platform is we blend ads in alongside of all of our analytics and of course all of the in-app purchase campaigns and dynamic flexible changes to the game that we can deliver through our toolkit so that you're seeing the full monetization ecosystem in one place. So that's the kind of smart ads chat and why we as deltaDNA are interested in ads. What I want to talk about for the rest of the webinar is our ad survey. For the last 3 years, we've been running an unbiased survey of publishers and developers just on their views about mobile ads. What's interesting is when we started doing this in 2015, we only had a bit over 100 responses, whereas last year we had over 300 responses to the ad survey. And I think that says a lot about the growth of ads and the interest of in-app advertising in games. you have to say it was unbiased, so we cover the full range of publisher sizes. The average respondent to the survey had 50K DAU, but we had a sort of long tail up to very big games with over 500K DAU. So this is kind of giving you a glimpse of what everyone's doing, from the little indie guys up to the biggest publishers. So just to start, I'm going to walk through all the kind of questions we asked and a little bit of analysis behind them, and sort of a little bit of commentary about what we feel that means for the industry as a whole. So the first set of questions we asked was about ad usage and formats. So the very simplest question, what kind of would you show ads at all? So what kind of games show ads? So here we split the responses by genre. So actually overall, only 12% of respondents showed no ads at all. So you can see here that this chart on the left here is people that don't show ads. So action games are highly unlikely to show ads, and strategy games don't show ads, but the rest of them are kind of fairly commonly show ads. We also did a split by core and casual games. So 20% of core games show no ads and 7% of casual games show ads. So actually, which kind of makes intuitive sense, core games are much less likely to show ads. But overall, the majority of people are showing ads in game. If we move on to what kind of ads do people actually use in their game, so obviously there's lots of different formats of ads that exist out there. You can see here on the chart on the left, there's the full gamut of ads you can use. There's banners and interstitial ads, there's native ads, offer walls, playable ads, rewarded video, and then video. I'm guessing video here is video interstitial ads. Unsurprisingly here, rewarded ads are the most popular, so over 60% of games were using rewarded video ads. What is interesting is the banner interstitial ads are still quite common, so a bit under 40% were still using those kind of ad formats. But what's really interesting, and you can't see it in the chart, but if you're looking deeper into the numbers, is that there's a lot of people using more than one type of ad in their game. So you can imagine, I'll talk about numbers in a sec, but you can imagine these here might be that you have an interstitial image that comes after each level, but you also have a rewarded video that appears on the lobby or in the store. So in 2015 and also in 2016, we saw maybe half of developers were using more than one type of ad. Whereas now we're seeing 62% of developers using more than one type of ads. It's a big growth in 1 year. We also see 12% of people use 4+ formats. So, they're showing playable ads, they might have an offer wall, they have rewarded video, they'll have some banner ads. So people, there are games out there that, and a reasonable fraction of games out there that are really using all the different tools that the ad networks will provide for them. Just out of interest, I split this between core games or mid and hardcore games and casual games. There's not a huge amount of difference between the two. Both of them use rewarded video quite a lot. Casual games are a bit more likely to use image interstitials, which makes sense. I mean, most people would remember, games like match 3 games or word puzzle games quite often will have an image interstitial which appears after each level or after each third level or something like that. What is interesting is the core games are much more likely to use native ads and offer wall. That's not the majority of them, but they're just more likely in general to engage in those types of ad formats, which makes sense as well because offer wall is quite a heavy investment for the player, and so you have to give them something that's quite chunky back. And strategy games lend themselves, or core games lend themselves to that kind of setup. So just as a summary for that section, a typical game will actually have quite a few types of ad monetization in it. So like I say, they might have a rewarded video as well as having image interstitials. Casual games are still more likely to show ads, and they're much more likely to use image interstitials. And then 20% of core games don't show ads, but the ones that do use rewarded, and then also some fraction use native and offer walls. So moving on to the ad strategies people are using and how that's impacting their revenue. So the question we asked about ad strategy, and you can see the questions here. So we asked which of these most describes your strategy towards ads. So we asked, do you have different types of non-paying players receive different ad strategies? Do most players see 1 ad or fewer per session? Do most players see 5 or more ads? Do you show ads at all? do you serve ads to people in the first session, and do you show ads to paying players? So you can see here is kind of a bit of a broad mix of different strategies you might take towards showing ads. What we found is that most people were showing one ad per session, which kind of lines up with the statistics we have for the games that run smart ads. The average kind of impressions per DAU is usually around one, although of course some games show a lot more. In terms of trends here between core and mid-core, we find that that the casual games are more likely to show ads in the first session. And of course, they're much more likely to show ads at all. So you can see here the 20% of mid-core games or mid and hardcore games that don't show ads at all. And then they're a little bit less likely to show ads to paying players. So core games are slightly more likely to show ads to their paying players. But overall, you can see here that people are being reasonably cautious with ads still. So maybe one ad per DAU. Mid-core, mid and hardcore games are not showing ads really in the first session. There's only really casual games doing that. And not very many people, like less than 20%, are showing more than 5 ads per session. So the next question we asked was, what factors do you take into account in setting the ad frequency? So the number of ads that you show maybe per session or per level, or DAU day, that kind of stuff. So these are kind of, what measurements are you going to go out and make that are going to influence your decision making about ad frequency? So the question, the possible responses were looking for a drop in fill rate, looking for increased player churn, trying to understand less player engagement, eCPMs, player enjoyment, potential loss of IAP revenue, reduced store ratings, or transparency of revenue from ad networks. So the most common response here is around player churn and player engagement and player enjoyment. So people are coming to our view of the world that actually when you use ads, it's really important to make sure that they're not causing churn and they're engaging players in the way that you think. What's interesting, I think, in this chart, and it is sort of below the most common responses, but in casual games, there's a much more keen interest on the business side of things. So people that make casual games are more likely to be worried about lower eCPMs, in particular lower fill rates, than people in mid and hardcore games. And I think that speaks a little bit to the fact that people in casual games have been showing ads for a bit longer, and so they understand a bit more about when you do show more ads, or when you are changing your ad strategy, there will be implications on the ad networks in terms of how well they can fill and how good the ad quality is going to be. In terms of revenue, this is very interesting. So we asked what fraction of your total revenue, this is for free play games, of course, so this is contrasting ad revenue with in-app purchases. So what fraction of that total bundle of revenue are you making through ads? And we can see that in mid and hardcore games, almost everyone's making sort of less than 20% of their revenue from ads. So, the majority of revenue in mid and hardcore games is still coming from IAPs. In casual games, you can see a much more broad spread. Still, the most common thing in casual games is for them to be IAP dominated, but we are seeing, maybe 40+% of casual games are making more than 20% of their revenue from ads. And in fact, there's maybe 20% of people that reported they made the majority of their revenue from ads. So for more casual games, it is definitely possible to be maybe not fully ad supported, but very close to fully ad supported. This is quite interesting. So obviously we've asked this question a number of years now, and we can see the trend in what people are reporting in terms of the percent of revenue that they're making from ads. So we take this last chart here and then work out the kind of average across the industry of how much money are people making from ads. And what we see is that in casual games, it's fairly flat, but actually in mid and hardcore games, it's sort of declining a little bit, actually. That 2 years ago, the people that were showing ads in mid and hardcore games were making a slightly higher fraction of their revenue from them. And actually, I don't think this has necessarily got to do with ads performing worse. It's actually got to do with the overall in-app purchase revenue going up in games. So what we've seen in our data is that the typical ARPDAU of a core game has gone from maybe 9 cents to sort of 15 cents in the last 2 years. So these games are making a lot more money through IAPs. And so the ads are sort of struggling to catch up in terms of how much revenue they can deliver on a daily basis. But it is interesting to kind of note this, that the core games are possibly making less money from ads than they used to in the past. But that, again, points to why it's important to have more optimizations there, because this IAP growth is definitely from people optimizing and working quite hard and running live ops and those kind of things with their IAPs in mind, but we tend not to see that kind of strategy, that very highly optimized, highly dynamic strategy applied to ads yet. So just to review that batch of questions, a typical game will still only show 1 ad per session. Casual games are much more, much more likely to show ads to payers and also to show ads in the first session. All games are really worried about churn and the player enjoyment and the impact of ads, which, that's the #1 thing in their mind when they're putting ads in. I think everyone kind of agrees with that. And then the typical game is making kind of 20-ish% of their revenue from ads, but casual games are obviously making a bit more than core games. So the next session is about ad sources and sentiment. So what we asked here was, how do you source your ads? Where do they come from? Do they come from an ad exchange like a MoPub or an AdMob? Are you using a bias mediation partner like a Fiber or an Iron Source? Are you using your own relationships with ad networks and your own cascade that you've built yourself, your own homebrew cascade in the app? Are you just using one ad network or one ad provider like a single Fiber? Are you using a mediation partner at all, if you don't know whether it's biased or unbiased, or are you using an unbiased mediation partner like ourselves or Apodeal? The distinction with unbiased and biased being that a biased mediation partner will offer you free mediation as long as they can compete against your traffic. So, the way that, say, an Iron Source will work is that you will put your traffic into Iron Source, but it will reserve the right to say, oh, no, wait a minute, I'm Iron Source and I've got a better ad for you. Here it is. And of course, they'll pay you for the benefit of that. Whereas unbiased means that in the way that we work, we don't care where the ads come from because we don't supply ads. We're hunting out for the best supplier of ads at all times for that particular user. And of course, you pay us for the benefit, but obviously we are optimizing all the time to make sure that we're delivering the best traffic to you in our cascade. So back to the results here then. So there's a very diverse mix in the way that publishers use ads. And I think this kind of reflects the state that the industry really is in on ads now, where it has come in so quickly that there's people at different levels of sophistication still, and it's still not clear what's the right way to get ads into your game. Most people in our survey, but that's only sort of 25%, said they were using a kind of MoPub or an AdMob, like a single ad exchange. The next most popular response was actually building your own homebrew ad mediation or ad cascade, so our own ad mediation solution. And then actually only 36% of people, if you add up all these numbers, were using any kind of third-party mediation. And then an even smaller number using unbiased mediation. So this kind of reflects that when it comes to the sophistication of going out and sourcing ads for your games, I mean, it's obvious, and many of us will know, talking to the bigger publishers, that obviously they are probably using a mediation partner or their own mediation, but still a lot of people out there that are just sort of getting started with ads and just sort of working with a single SDK or a very small number of options in terms of getting ads into the game. And as people experience know, that's going to necessarily lead to lower quality ads and lower the eCPMs. So, and I mean, that kind of statement is reflected in this question. So we asked people how many ad networks they actually work with. And so the options were 1, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, or more than 10. And still, we see 60% of people are using between 2 and 5 networks. So that, that kind of bundles up all the answers we had from the last question, including the people that made their own homebrew cascades and the people that were obviously using mediation partners to get ad networks in. But you can see this is still only a moderate number of networks. 20% of people are still only using one network, which is obviously going to have some limitations. What was also really curious in these numbers was that we saw a big growth when we look back at previous years, and some people are using 6+ networks. So in 2016, only 8% of people said they were using 6+ networks, whereas in 2017, 17% of people. So we doubled the fraction of people that said they were using that many. It's still the minority, but you can see the trend that is growing for games to use more and more ad networks to try to fill in more diverse places and make sure they're getting quality ads for the users, no matter what platform or region they're in. And I think this is where we start to see the ad mediation or the ad business going, is that it's clear that if you want to satisfy all users and have a good experience and show high quality ads, you need to go out and get ads from a diverse range of places. The next thing we asked was more of a sentiment towards ads. So as a publisher, how do you feel about ads in your games? What's the phrase that comes to mind when you think about ads? So the options we gave people were: ads are an engagement blocker, ads enhance the player progress, ads are an important monetization opportunity, ads monetize non-payers, ads are a necessary evil. In the ad business, only the ad networks win. Ads scare off players. Ads are vital to the game economy, and ads are worth doing. So we asked people to tell us which of these was the kind of first thing that came to mind when they thought about ads. Now, what was really interesting is in 2016, when we asked this question, the most popular response, with sort of 48% of the votes, was that ads are a necessary evil. Now, that's really interesting because it basically says that the prevailing sentiment in 2016 towards ads was a negative one. People didn't really want to show ads, but they felt like they had to because the revenue potential was too big to ignore, but they didn't want to do it. If we step forward to when we did this in 2017, actually, that's not true anymore. So the most common responses in 2017 were that ads were an important monetization opportunity and they monetize non-payers. And in fact, while some people still view this as a necessary evil, it's much more common for people to feel like this is something that they have to do, and it's really, really important to their game and their company to do so. And the other big increases you can see in responses, even though they're sort of below the top line ones, are that people stop thinking that it's engagement blocker. So the fraction of people that thought ads are an engagement blocker went down from 20 to a bit more than 10%, and then the other ones, all the other sort of negative sentiments went down as well. So scaring off players went down. People started to think that actually ads could enhance player progress. Less people were thinking that ad networks win, and obviously altogether that they're much more worth doing. So overall, I mean, this is a really interesting view that people's sentiment, people's kind of gut feeling towards ads has really radically changed in the last year, which I think makes a lot of sense. With people starting to get a little bit more familiar. A lot of very high-profile games are using ads in very interesting and innovative ways. They're much more integrated into the core gameplay, and so I think everyone starts to understand that there's a potential to use these in a way that benefits both players and publishers. Just need to put a little bit of thought into it. So another question we asked about sentiment, and less about kind of how do you feel about ads, but more how do you feel about your ad strategy. So is your ad strategy aggressive? Is it balanced? Is it cautious? Are you confident with your ad strategy? Do you think it's effective? Are you very experimental? Or are you unsure? So what's interesting here is that, again, we kind of looked at this 2016 versus 2017. What's interesting is that in 2016, the most common responses, people said they were cautious towards ads. A lot of people said they're experimental, and they still do. A lot of people still say they're balanced, but the prevailing thought was to be cautious. Now we see a kind of much more interesting split between people taking a balanced approach to ads. And I mean, if you look at the kind of answers we've had already in the survey, it seems to suggest that a balanced approach to ads is one ad per DAU. It's rewarded video instead of interstitials. It's sort of 2 to 5 ad networks in a cascade. It's that kind of classic view of ads. But what's also interesting, people are still kind of quite experimental. So I think this kind of suggests that people are becoming less cautious about ads, but still, I don't think anyone has landed on the final solution for ad implementation in their games yet. But people are sort of getting there slowly but surely. So to wrap that all up, then I think the kind of output of this is very much that the advertising industry is still really evolving quite fast. We're starting to see, the majority of games have some form of in-game advertising in them now. They're not the prevail of casual games only anymore. Core games are introducing ads and introducing them in very sort of native or very well integrated ways so that they're part of the core game loop. And players are going to engage with them, or much more likely to engage them. They can't just ignore them because they're hidden away in a side menu or in the store or something like that. Rewarded video is the most common form of in-game advertising. Native and off-walls are growing a little bit in core games, but they're still not quite there. Core games are more likely to be cautious, of course, and they show, like I said many times, about one ad per session. Casual games can make 30 to 40% of the revenue from ads, and core games a bit less. But interestingly, this has been on the decline. So I think, while there are fully ad-supported games out there, I don't think that there's a huge population of 100% ad-supported games out there. I think most people are mixing the two. Most common way of getting ads in is through an exchange or through a homebrew waterfall, but obviously the use of mediation services is large and it's growing. And we can kind of see that because most people are leaning towards using 2 to 5 ad networks, but there has been a big increase in the last sort of couple of years of people using 6+, using quite a lot of ad networks to make sure that they have coverage across all regions and platforms. And with that, I will take questions. So thank you everyone for listening. And if you type your questions into the box, then John, who is on the other side, will start feeding them to me. So thank you again for listening. Nope. Sorry, they're coming in thick and fast. I need to move my UI around so I can see them. Oh, come on. There we go. All right. So the first question is, do you have any data on skippable versus non-skippable ads? Not in this presentation, and we have a little bit in, and obviously our data we collect from our smart ads service. In general, rewarded ads are always sort of non-skippable, right? Or I mean, you can't get the reward if you skip. So it's a little bit tricky there because obviously the player kind of has to watch it, otherwise they won't get the reward. So the vast majority of people are actually using non-skippable, and like I say, because reward is the most common usage, that is not something that's easy for us to really get a handle on. But in terms of, so I see, yes, the short answer is no, but to my knowledge, not that many people are using non-skippable video instituals unless they're in kind of really casual games. So the next one was, what is your experience with native ads in the actual core game? Example, greedy games can show ads on the pitch in baseball games. So it's really interesting, actually. I mean, this is still a very sort of nascent time for that kind of native ads. We get asked a lot about, that's a classic example of, like, in sports games, you can have ads on the billboards, or, particularly racing games a lot. You can do deals to put, different types of cars or different types of decals on the cars and all that sort of stuff. The way that we've tended to see that work, because what tends to happen with native ads is that you'll have a direct deal. So rather than, it's not going to be something where you'll say, here's a banner on a baseball pitch, now go off and dynamically find me ads to show. Most of the time when we've done it, it's been a direct deal where someone says, okay, well, this week, our banner is sponsored by somebody Toad or something. So actually, when people do it with us, they tend to run that through our normal Engage campaign system as opposed to our actual ad system, and that it's totally set up to do that because we can dynamically update content on the game through our campaign system. So I think the short answer is generally when people do that, number one, they'll do a direct deal with either a brand or another sort of game publisher, and then we can just take that content and put it through our normal messaging system as opposed to, well, our normal CDN for the game as opposed to running it exclusively as an ad. So next one along, one of our mediation partners mentioned that you run a risk of giving too little impressions to each network if you run too many ad networks at the same time. Do other publishers adhere to that rule? How does that explain the growth in 6+ network games? So what I think happens is that in each region, you will have a shortish waterfall. So as you say, you may have 3 or 4 networks that you run in a certain region, but not all networks are good in all regions. And I mean, I guess it depends on how heavy you are focused on tier 1 or not. If you really only have players in tier 1, then you don't need to run a very deep waterfall. If you are very interested in trying to monetize your players in like Latin America or China or other areas, you need to have relationships with different ad networks. And so I think that's why when people answer the question, it's much more about, in the game, you will have to be able to have all these ad networks available. It's just that you will prioritize certain ones in different regions, just to make sure that you get a good eCPM. Because I mean, we know from some of our clients that have done this, if you do not explicitly go out and say, look, my game is getting millions of downloads in China, I need a good ad supply, you won't be able to do that if you just plug in one network and expect it to work in different regions. It just won't. Okay, so next question. Do you have any data on the usage of playable ads? Have you seen an increase in adoption in the last 12 months? So yes, I mean, I think this is an interesting question. Obviously, the survey that I showed is numbers from 2017. I think definitely playable ads have come along a lot since then. What is interesting, of course, is the technology behind playable ads is getting a lot better. So the early playable ads were quite primitive. I know, people have seen the original kind of Game of War ones where you just sort of drag one thing across and it doesn't feel interactive at all, whereas now they're getting a lot better. So I think that playable ads are going to continue to grow as they get more immersive and start to feel a lot more like the actual gameplay. The interesting thing about playable ads, of course, is that they do, obviously you can only have playable ads for other types of games, and the big thing everyone wants to kind of bring into games is more brands. So I think there's an interesting question there. It's got a divergence of if we're kind of reaching a saturation point in terms of performance networks, so games advertising other games, whereas you would hope that more brands will come in and they will probably want to use video as the primary format. So I think there's an interesting tension there between playable ads becoming more and more sophisticated, but also rewarded video becoming more sophisticated as more brands try to come in and use those in games. All right, so next one. Hello, how do you calculate ad revenue LTV, or do you use other metrics to measure the retention projection? So interesting about ad revenue LTV is it pretty much is just retention. So if you know, it's a bit different from, say, in-app purchase LTV, and I know you can work out the in-app purchase LTV if you, say, take the ARPDAU and multiply it through by the retention curve. That's not a great way of doing it, but you can do it that way. Similarly, if you know what your impressions per day is, or impressions per DAU is, that's actually much more stable because your eCPM might fluctuate a little bit, but the way the game is designed, it's almost going to be more, like I say, most games are limited to the number of ads that you can show per DAU. So really, it is going to be every day that someone plays, they watch one ad, on average that ad is worth whatever your eCPM is divided by 1,000, and then it's very easy to then multiply that through. So if you know your retention curve, then you pretty much know your ad revenue LTV, because all you need to do is basically, if it's only one ad per DAU, all you need to do is multiply the whole thing through by your eCPM, and that gives you the LTV. Add it all up. So I think the short answer is that you can do it in the same way that most people do the in-app purchase stuff, and in fact, it's easier and is a more likely to be correct. Okay, next one. Do you see data on optimal rewarded video length? We normally see 30 seconds as the optimal length, but ad networks usually offer premiums for longer ads. Yeah, I'm sure they do. We don't have any hard data on that. Well, okay. The only thing I can say anecdotally is that when we've worked on media apps, they will show many, many more ads. And this is kind of obvious if you think about in-app ads as being analogous to TV ads, right? So, I mean, I tried to work this out once, that the ratio of ad content to TV content on, like, network TV is, I think, like 15% or 20% or something. So if you think about that the same as if you have a level and that level takes, I don't know, like 2 minutes to complete, then it's totally reasonable to have 10% of that length as a video. So the point I'm trying to get at here is that actually people are quite cautious about the amount of ads that you can watch, or ads that people will watch before they get frustrated. And like I was going to say, when we see people doing like on-demand video, they'll quite happily put like 5 ads like you would in a TV break back to back before they'll let you watch another video. So, I think games, I mean, it depends on how much content you're letting people consume before you show them ads. If it's like 1 ad per level, and like I say, the level is 3 minutes, then having really long videos is probably wrong. But if it's 1 per day, I don't see really reason why you shouldn't be making them watch a 45-second or 1 minute video if they're going to go away and do 10 minutes of gameplay or 15 minutes of gameplay. Next question is, should there be any caution with too many ads in the first session? So all I would say about the first session is that you shouldn't let ads interrupt the kind of first bit of onboarding. Most games will have, obviously a tutorial, but then they'll unlock themselves over a period of like 4 to 5 minutes where the player is becoming engaged in the game content. You probably wouldn't show ads at that point because it may be distracting, and it would sort of make them forget potentially what you just showed them. You put a lot of effort in to onboard them onto. What I would also say is that if you are going to use rewarded ads, I would definitely onboard the rewarded ads in the first session. So, once you've onboarded the rewarded ads, I don't think there's any reason to worry too much about capping them unless you're nervous about IAP cannibalization. But if you want ads to be effective, it makes a lot of sense to take the people, put the ad, if they're rewarded ads, put the option to show, to view them in an obvious place, and then onboard it in the way you would onboard any other game mechanic. And of course, that's going to increase the engagement in them. So I think the answer is no, there shouldn't really be any caution about the first session in any way that you would be worried about any session. Obviously, if you're limiting ads, it's much more about IAP cannibalization rather than engagement. But I wouldn't show them during the tutorial, but I would show them at some point during the overall larger onboarding to make sure that people know they're there and they know what they're going to get for them. Okay, so many questions. Do you have data about playable versus regular rewarded video ads? Sorry, no, we don't have any data on the performance of one versus the other. I mean, I guess the interesting thing is that, anecdotally, people say that playable obviously has a lot higher click-through. So, when you're talking about it from the acquisition side, people are quite keen on playable. So that clearly should mean higher eCPMs. But from the mediation side, we don't really know whether that does translate into higher eCPMs or higher anything. Okay, in terms of rewarded ads, do you know the impact of session length, retention, and monetization versus, say, periodically free rewards? Sort of. So I sort of understand what you're saying here, because this is an idea that I've had many times. Is like, why would you give, in a world where you can make people do rewarded video, why would you give them a daily reward? Why don't you make them earn it for watching a video? And similarly, for say casino games, if you've got a 4-hour timer where you can get free chips, why not make people watch an ad for the free chips rather than just giving it to them? The short answer on this is that most games, and this is changing, right? But the benchmark number for ad engagement is about 30 to 40% of DAU. In other words, there's about 60 to 70% of players that will just never engage with ads. They won't click it. If you put a rewarded ad button there, they won't click it. Now, you can embed it deeper into the game and you can get that to go up. And we do see high ad engagement rates when people have done that. But for most games, it's hard to get more than half the people to watch ads because there's just a fraction of people that don't want to watch ads. They don't care what the reward is. They don't want to watch it. So if you replace your free reward mechanic is an essential part of the game, say for instance in slot games where you need to drip feed people currency because the sync is so effective, if you make people watch ads, that will impact the people that refuse to watch them. Now, you do start to monetize half the people, which is good, but so I think the point here is that for the people that will engage with ads, I don't think there's any difference, but the point is that a fraction of people will kind of refuse to engage with ads, and so then if it's an essential element to the game, you will see sort of negative engagement for those people. Next question is the one I just answered. Do you have any benchmarks on average percentage of players that actually engage with ads voluntarily? So I answered that. It's about, yeah, it's about 30 or 40%. You can make it, like I say, you can make it better if you offer higher rewards. The one thing I would say to that actually is that I did have some numbers on it, which are quite interesting. But basically, if you offer 10 cents of value, IAP value. So I did a whole analysis where I took all the games that we have, I converted all of the virtual currencies and ad rewards into real world currency, and I measured it against, I kind of measured the reward people are getting versus the engagement rate. So basically, if you have a 10-cent reward for your ad watch, you'll get 40-ish% engagement. If you have a 1-cent reward, you'll have nothing. Like below 5 cents, people will not watch ads. If the thing you're giving them is worth less than 5 cents, they will just not watch ads. So you have to be kind of between 5 and 10 cents. If you offer a lot more, then you can drive the engagement rate up. But then at that point, you're starting to cannibalize IAP quite considerably because you can do the basic math, but a single ad view is not worth 10 cents. So I think, yeah, the answer is there that if you give something of actual value, you can get people to engage. If you give something of no value, then it's very, very hard to get people to engage with ads. Still a whole deep pile of questions. What is the video and rewarded video revenue percentage in the total ads revenue on average? What is the video and rewarded video revenue in the total ads percentage on average? If it's high. If it's high, do publishers find it worthy to put additional formats to get little additional increase in revenue? Okay, how about I put it in a slightly different way? Because obviously it depends on what kind of game you have. But a typical rewarded ad, they're going up in value, but let's say a typical rewarded ad is worth a $10 eCPM. That's a little bit low, maybe, but it'll be between $10 and $20 eCPM. A typical image interstitial might be $3. So roughly, rewarded video is 5+ times an interstitial. And then offer walls are kind of like way, way, way higher than rewarded video. So offer walls are kind of like $50 eCPMs or higher. So then it starts to become a numbers game, right? So if you only got one rewarded view a day, but you can show 10 image interstitials, then actually it's worth showing image interstitials because even though they're not worth very much each time, if you show 10 of them, then that'll give you something useful. So if you have a natural way to incorporate that in your game, that's not going to annoy the players, then it makes sense to do that. Similarly, if you've got a way where you can have a rewarded video that gives you a small reward and have an offer wall that gives you a big reward, that makes sense too. So I think the reality is that if you can find ways to use these in parallel, then it's totally worth doing, and people do that. But it has to kind of fit into the game. And like I say, for the lower value formats like image interstitials, you have to be able to show quite a lot of them before people get annoyed. And then similarly for the more complicated things like offer walls, you have to be able to give a big reward and it not hurt your in-app purchases. All right, next question. Do we know what effect the introduction of 5G internet means for ad business? I don't know. Does it have? I mean, I don't think it has that big a impact because even today, the ad traffic on games is probably lower than the actual traffic you're doing in terms of getting stuff off your assets off your CDN and updates and all that sort of stuff, right? So I would have thought a bigger impact for ads will be a higher fraction of the world covered in 4G. And that's it. I mean, just mobile game in general does still suffer from the fact that mobile broadband is concentrated in cities and developed countries. Now, obviously, that's where most of the money is, so that's kind of why it's okay. But there is a big fraction of the population out there that can't engage in modern mobile games yet. I think so. I would imagine, and to add a point to that, ad monetization is much more important in developing countries than it is in developed cities, because if you have someone with the most recent iPhone running around on the streets of New York, you're always going to make more money on IAPs than you are from ads for that person. Whereas in developing nations, that's not true. Ad monetization is a much more effective model, and I've seen many cases where it's worth, if you're making ad-only games, it's worth thinking about how you suit them to those markets. So I think that's probably more interesting than the kind of higher end stuff. Concerning ad LTV, doesn't it saturate over time? We see better eCPMs when we do UA and get fresh users. So I mean, that's interesting. Obviously, there's a saturation over a short period of time, which is within a day, right? So there's a common thing of every ad network wants the first impression of the day, and after that, there's a quite steep decline for that user. So that happens over a session and over a day. I would have thought that if you're talking to your ad networks directly, they will be able to ensure that you get good eCPMs all the time, right? There should always be people that in your game that you can work. There should always be stuff that you can show people in your game. They can go and find it, right? I mean, I guess no. I mean, yeah, they should be able. If you're running an effective mediation solution, you should be able to find good quality ads to show people no matter where they are in their lifespan. How do you think performance campaigns would compete with brand campaigns for video infrastructure in the future? Is it going to be easier or harder for them? So the classic thing with brands is that they're willing to pay higher eCPMs. Again, I think that what we'll see, and it kind of relates to what I was saying before, that brands will be very conscious of who they're advertising to. So I think the fill will always be quite low. They'll want, the brands are a bit like games, but worse, right? They'll want very premium users to be watching their ads. And so I think that performance won't go away because it'll always be necessary to get the fill to show as many ads as we're trying to do. I don't think, even when brands come in a big way, I don't think they're going to be any bigger than kind of 20% of the overall fill of ads. Obviously, they might be extremely valuable, but I don't think they're going to dominate the overall ad market. So I think performance networks will be here to stay for a long time. Can you please expand upon the idea of free reward mechanics impacting people who typically refuse to watch ads? Yeah, so what I was saying before is that obviously if you take away all your free reward mechanics, you get rid of daily reward, get rid of your spinny wheel, get rid of your 4-hour bonus, and if you made all of them gated by an ad, then obviously people that don't want to watch ads wouldn't get them anymore. And so then that might break the economics of the game, because you've built a game where you're expecting to drip feed people currency. And of course, if they're not getting that anymore, the game's going to be almost unplayable for them. So it's really just if you were to get rid of the free reward mechanics and replace them with ad gated drip feeds, then that would be a problem. Okay, so that was a lot of questions. I'm at the bottom list now. I think I'll leave it there because I think I'm running out of oomph in my voice. But thanks everyone for coming along, and thanks for so many interesting questions. Hopefully that discussion was really useful for everyone. And watch out for our next webinar, and hopefully we'll see you then. All right, goodbye everyone.